Okay.
There you go. You know it because it gives the recording heads up there. Now we know. So
Yeah.
now we can go ahead. Yeah.
Okay.
So the Ben Reilly clone saga will someday, I'm sure, appear on some big screen, right?
Well, and this is it. And for now, we're just like I said, Ben's getting his first, like Grandma's making his first Spider Ben outfit. And that's what we did. That's his nickname, is like Spider Ben.
That's cute.
And then we're looking forward to, my son is looking forward to the time where he can do like Spider-Man and then go out with Ben when he's a little older in the Spider Ben. And it's like, there he is, my little, like literally
My
my
little
little
clone.
mini me,
Yeah.
my little clone. Yeah.
Awesome.
But again, not breeding nerds or anything in this
Oh,
family.
of course. Now I don't know how that could have happened, right?
Yeah. Well, and like I said, Spider-Man is like the gateway thing in our family. It's like, so, but I
Right.
never thought he would actually go that far.
Yeah, no. I definitely can't relate to that. My 18-year-old and I weren't up talking about all the different Marvel villains and rating which ones we thought were best from the movies. Just
Yeah,
the other night
exactly.
when we both should have gone to bed after What If or whatever. So
Well,
this,
that's the whole thing. Like, so much has happened since the last time we talked, because we've had Black Widow,
right,
we've had
yeah.
Shang-Chi, we've had Loki, and then What If, and
Yeah,
there's
exactly.
so
We
many
were mid Loki last time you and I talked, because we were
things.
talking
Yeah,
about Falcon and Winter Soldier, right, and the
right.
implications there. And so we hadn't even circled back to Loki yet. But
Yeah.
I did just see Shang-Chi. I'm not sure the right
Shang-Chi, yeah.
pronunciation. Shang,
Yeah,
right?
Shang-Chi. Yeah,
Yeah.
always remember that it sounds like Sean. Like,
Okay.
that was a
That's
brilliant
right.
little line
Yeah,
that
because
they
that
put
was
in
in there
with
because he
Katie,
goes
with
to
like the
Sean.
really hiding from your dad, and you went from Shang to Sean.
That's right. That's
Like, no
right.
wonder he found you.
Yeah, I just saw it last week, and it's very interesting to me. And this is we don't need to litigate this fight necessarily here, although I get into it on Facebook enough when people are like, "Oh, these are very just sort of lighthearted formulaic stories," and I am always
Oh,
surprised when I hear people say things like that because they're comic
yeah.
book movies, which of course tells me they don't read comic books because comic books are
Yeah.
not very light and fluffy
Yeah.
anything. They're pretty in depth. But
Oh my God.
to
Yeah.
say, wow, because as I watched it, I thought there was quite a bit of just really, really humanizing stuff. And when you have a story that involves like big, huge lion dragon creatures and faceless little fuzzy whatevers, and then to have it so humanized, and to have it so emotionally relevant, I thought was quite good, actually, quite
Well,
talented.
this is it. Like, I've been excited about everything that has come out. Like, nothing has disappointed. And I mean, I think the only thing that disappointed us was the idea that where we were, because of the way lockdown was going, we weren't able to see Black Widow. Black Widow is the only movie we have not seen in a theater
Oh,
on
yeah,
opening
yeah.
weekend out of the entire MCU, which instead prompted my son to go buy a projector. And so now our backyard, we can watch movies from
There you go.
my gazebo as a result
Yeah,
of
yeah.
this will not stand. And so, so we've rewatched a lot of Marvel stuff in the backyard. And again, but yeah, so no, that was phenomenal. And then with Shang-Chi, I mean, that was actually our first time back in a movie theater, and we did
Yeah.
it as a family. Of course, we were spaced from everyone else, but it was a production for us. Like, we went to one of the Cinemax VIP ones where they have like wait staff. We was
Oh,
like, we are
wow.
doing this up. Yeah, we are doing this up. And it was awesome. I mean, and again, a really good example of what you're talking about when people say, oh, it's lighthearted. And I'm like, oh my gosh, they have dealt with so much stuff that goes from, I mean, just in terms of how they reclaimed
Mhm.
that character and did it in a way that does away with the old stereotypes, but still draws enough on canons that it's not like they completely reinvented. So they've got that element of it. The way they address the retconning and Trevor, and oh my God, I never imagined seeing Sir Ben Kingsley doing so much more extra Trevor and just going way deep into
Just
Trevor.
bringing that
Um,
up.
you know, but then also too, like the fact that there was so much stuff with subtitles, and then they deal with the family stuff too. And that was the other part, was that whole thing of who his father was, his father's attempt at reparenting and doing stuff when he was with, when their mother was alive, and then how he fell back into old behaviors. And that, again, and even with the dragons and all these other different things that you see, that final bit at the end, you realize, well, he's the villain and the bad guy ish, but like so many other things we've talked about in the Marvel universe or with the X-Men, he's not actually the real villain. He's somebody that it's a hurt person hurting someone else, and therefore he's susceptible to a larger toxic evil.
Yeah.
So he's just as much, and yeah. So there's just like, oh my God, like, when people talk about how it's so like light and fluffy, it's like, okay, you clearly either don't know what you're talking about, like you don't read the comics, you don't, Were you in the same theater as me? Were you watching the
Were
same
you
movie?
with the and speaking of the casting that they had with where is he now?
Oh, Simu
I
Liu?
yeah, so you played the father. I'm
Well, the
trying to
father,
remember
yeah,
what his
Tony Leung.
Yes, there he is. There he is. I was looking. Yeah, IMDb had a confusing picture. That was what it was. I was just looking to make sure I'm getting all the names right, and I was just looking to see I mean, he has quite a filmography already with his
Yeah,
history and stuff. Anybody. It's just the same thing as anybody who's ever watched anything at all should recognize Michelle Yao. Uh,
yeah.
who's on there as well. And anytime, by the way, you're on the wrong side of her, you should know that that's not going to go well. If you just there should
You
be some
notice
kind of
that too?
ingrained
It's like,
feeling
oh
of like,
God, no.
whoa, no, this is the crouching tiger moment where my life got away from me if she's my enemy. But
Yeah.
with he brings a really masterful performance to the role of this man who basically put down the power, right? He put down
Mhm.
the evil power or whatever you want to say that he was using to basically rule for what was he, like 1,000 years old at that point.
Oh yeah, yeah, something crazy.
And the interesting thing is that without the fantastical element, you wouldn't get quite the benefit of this. But basically, it's a guy who he puts away his power that puts him in the role of being this big tough guy and taking over everything in order to sort of make some kind of let's say redemption or whatever, that he finds redemption through this peaceful life with his wife and his kids. And then, of course, the way that he reacts to it, I'm going to say, is that the violent world comes in around and destroys this. And I think
Yeah.
that in a way, it's funny because this is kind of summed up for me in a scene where he takes his son with him to go and kill a bunch of guys, right? And
Yeah.
basically, he walks
Bring
into
your
this.
kid to work
Yes,
day.
exactly, and he's like
Oh.
chucking people all over the place, and then he finishes one of them off. It's one of these like
Mhm.
slightly off screen to maintain a. I always say the difference between Logan and any other X-Men movie. It's the cutaway or what happens right off screen.
Yeah.
So but he blows up. I mean, ostensibly, shoots this guy with a laser beam or whatever from the rings,
Yeah.
right in front of his son, right? And then he turns to him and he says, "I need your help." And he doesn't say a lot. There's a lot of things he doesn't say that are subtext in my mind, which are,
Yeah.
this is the way the world is. I need you to be here to see that we need to be stronger than the world. I thought I could relax. I can't. This is the way the world actually is, and you need to be prepared from it or for it. And that's chilling, right?
Yeah.
And at that point, that's you see him at that point. Now maybe there's a dodging of some responsibility because the world that followed him into his post peace life and destroyed his family in that way. The violence was something that he begat, right? There were people coming looking for vengeance for things he had done to their families, right?
Well, and
So
that's that whole thing about that legacy where he spent all of those years with that access to power. And it's, that whole thing about, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So he had done this thing where it was literally like he had to keep like upping the ante and doing bigger things
yeah,
because you kind of, in a sense, almost like he was addicted to power. And so, he had to keep upping the dose, upping the dose. It led to all of this kind of, again, his godlike status in his own mind. And there's no way you can do that for 1,000 years and not have consequences. So in other words, you're like, yay, dude found this wonderful person and he put these rings aside. But when you're looking at like hundreds of years, millennia of one kind of behavior, and he got what, not even a couple decades of like, this other
right.
life. So that relatively speaking, like in terms of, he was, I guess you could say, still in early stages of his like recovery and any kind of rewiring that, if we look at this from a neuroplasticity perspective, he'd hardwired some really major stuff in there. And so I think he was doing pretty well, but to have it go like that, that shows that whole, like, that's all it takes to go back into that defensive mode. And then this is about protecting my family. And if I have to teach them these, what other people would call dysfunctional ways of doing things, to protect us, and it is that thing, well, fine, because I dropped my guard for a moment, which is again how that couple of decades would have felt relative to the hundreds of
years old, right?
Yeah, I dropped my guard for a moment, and look what happens. So yeah, but like you're saying, like his performance, he really did like a phenomenal job and made him human. He wasn't just this big bad evil guy. And I mean, don't get me wrong, he's not going to win Dad of the Year.
But interestingly enough, he probably in his mind would think of himself as a good nominee in a way, right?
Yeah.
Because, the interesting thing is, to a certain extent, he never really had to yield. And this is the way it is, maybe for a lot of things in life, where he didn't ever have to fully yield control, because he still got kind of what he wanted. Now, maybe he would have liked to go live in the magical village, and they said no, but that's still stuck in his craw years and years later, right? And it's
that was still like, the in-laws don't like me and they won't invite me over for dinner.
And so when he finds it, and he goes back to what he would have described, and does, I think, sort of in the film, talks about this almost inevitability of, well, I put the rings back on and we had to go fight, and now we're going to do this, and then we're going to get your mom back and all this. And there's a really powerful moment where Shang-Chi is actually fighting him, and in this part, and he tells him, we needed you, and and vengeance was more important. And he says the rings, of course, but the power, the vengeance, the get back, all that the father thought, boy, that's inevitable. I have to do this now, right? He's like, you didn't. We needed you. You could have, essentially, once again, a lot of subtext to say, you could have just come. I mean, we could have gone to family counseling. You could have built a life with us. You could have taken us to school. You could have done homework with us. We all could have pulled together. We could have healed. Yeah. And yet instead it was important to become a super ninja and hunt down people. That was more important.
Well, and that can go even to there's the full range, because again, most parents don't err quite that far down the
right.
But even that idea that when kids say they need you, it's what we think they need versus what they actually need. And so in many respects, he was the typical parent with I got to keep working hard to look after my family, put the roof over their head, teach them how the world works, does whatever, as opposed to I need, they want the dad that's gonna if you're going to teach him martial arts, be the one that's actually teaching him, not having some other guy beat the living bejesus out of him while he's, I get that you want him to train with the master, but I think he would have appreciated, let's the proverbial horseplay, or let's play, chess or something else, strategic, those kinds of things. Where it's there really wasn't a lot of those parent-child moments, except for when the mom was around, and it was he didn't know how to do that unless she was there to facilitate it. And that's sort of, again, the shame, because I think a lot of times as parents, we sit there and we think about, again, we're always trying to do the right thing, but we have that thing that there's choices that we make that in retrospect, it's not until the kid is older where they're like, you know what, I get what you were doing, but you know what, I would have really appreciated you having more time to spend with me on homework, or I really didn't need to be signed up for this team, that team, and that team. I would have much rather, kick the soccer ball around in the backyard than have been at tournaments or something like that.
Right. Yes, exactly. And that's where it compares to that, where you see the real addiction that comes in is that addiction to power, the addiction to control. There's a book called Monkey Traps. Steve Hauptman hasn't been on for a long time, but he and I know each other. He's been on the podcast, and there's actually, people can find it. There's some of the first chapters of that book are actually available. There's a Monkey Traps podcast feed people can still find that broadcast the first few chapters of those. But his argument in the book is that It's based off of the old concept of how hunters in Africa, well, apparently they have these traps designed for monkeys that they can wriggle their hand in if their hand is open and grab a hold of a piece of fruit or something that they want to eat. But
Uh,
if their hand is grasped onto it, they can't get out. And the
ah,
idea being that most, if not all of them, apparently, will sit there and keep trying to pull their hand out, and you
as
can
opposed to letting
walk
go
up
of the
to it,
fruit.
right, and they won't let go of it, right, and you can even walk up and catch them or kill them or whatever they do to them at that
Yeah.
point. Um, and they'll still be like trying to run away with this trap attached to their arm because they won't let go, right?
Mhm.
It's sort of like on there was an episode of The Simpsons I remember where Homer did that in a candy machine, and right before the firemen were going to cut off his arm to get him out, they asked, "Hey, wait, Homer, are you still holding on to the candy?" And he says, "What's your point?" But so similar thing, similar thing,
Yeah.
but hanging on to that control or the illusion of that control,
Control. Yeah.
and you can see how this goes generationally because Sean mentions at one point, I thought it was also very interesting in this kind of a setting to say, when it was like, oh, well, he sent me to kill someone. And of course, it's almost assumed, right? Like, oh, and then what happened? Well, I mean, I ran away. I didn't do it or anything.
Yeah.
And then later on, he's like, well, I totally did it, actually. And, he, and it's
Yeah.
not delved into, but it's like, how that control and that rage and anger is passed down to where it's like now he is like so many people getting caught into that, not only the addiction to that, trying to have that illusion of control, but he's also buying into what he's been told about himself, right? Like, what is your purpose? Well, I am what
Mhm.
I'm told that I was. That's who I am.
Yeah, I'm this fighting machine. I'm supposed
Yeah.
to do this. There's this legacy. And that we also learn the patterns of our family. And that they're not always healthy. And I
Yeah.
mean that families are these little self-contained ecosystems. And so what your normal is, and so for him, like that was what I really thought was interesting too, was the comparison, the fact that he got to just like, when he would hang with Katie's family and go there for breakfast and do whatever, like that's literally he's had probably more normal family time with them
Yeah.
than he did with his own family, or at least in a way that he would be, consciously aware of it, because again, thinking of his, early childhood and infancy, that's not gonna,
Right.
yeah, so that he's had that, and where it was that like sitting down and breakfast, and there's the grandma trying to either marry people off or, do whatever, she's, quietly running the show around the breakfast table.
Yeah, and even in the rejection of his father's values,
Yeah.
he's still even at that end point where he's like, well, I guess I'm going to have to kill him. That is what I was trained to do. That's what he taught me to do. And ultimately, it's not really who he is, but he still is buying into that persona, right?
right
Even at
right
that
to your
time.
end, right? If I can't have your approval and the only way to stop you is to do this, then I
Yeah.
guess I've got to suck it up and be what you told me I was, like this, self-fulfilling prophecy, like I'm just going to have to buy into it. And that you can see how like gutting that is for
Yeah.
him. And I think that was what was really brilliant too, is as they showed the rings changing color, the idea is that this is not what the rings don't have to be a thing.
Yeah.
It's what kind of energy they feed off in a way. And so it was interesting to see how that all played out, because it was that moment where you're like, oh, seriously, is he going to have to do that thing and be that guy? And so it was nice that he got to go down a path that, again, in terms of his own redemption, wasn't the deep dark hole that his father had to go down.
And in a
And,
universe in which you could say that that kind of thing, well, let's just say patricide or attempted patricide is not unusual in this universe and
Mhm.
is somewhat celebrated at times where it's like, I mean, what's I think Peter Quill, had his father. You got Gamora and Nebula, and they're of course,
yeah,
it's a whole messed up situation there. As far as
yeah,
like saying, well, I gotta either kill my parent or avenge them. There's a lot of that in this universe, and to say so, it was interesting to see something to where in the end, his appeal was to his father was to basically say, "I need you to be my dad." And in the very
yeah,
last moments, you could argue that he did. That he's like, you know what, you're right. And for him to say, "I'm going to yield and just sacrifice," And once again, in subtext, he didn't say, "You better get all those rings while this guy's sucking out my soul juice."
Yeah.
But that's essentially what it was, right? It's like, okay, you're right. I need to, sacrifice myself for you. But once again, more dramatically and more literally than most people do. But that opportunity to then say, I'm going to take a chance to say, you're right. You do need me. I need to sacrifice myself here and not make you do stuff and put you into this position.
Well, and it was that flipping too of what kind of self-sacrifice, because he would have
Yeah.
argued before that he had made all of these other kinds of sacrifices in terms of what he had to do to keep them
That's a
safe.
good
And
point.
again, that was the whole, yeah, but Dad, that wasn't what we needed from you. We didn't need to live in, in a compound and this and that. And well, and even the idea too that, and you mentioned it before about the whole, the issues with the in-laws. And it's like, well, again, you were doing this stuff that these were not folks that were oblivious to what you were doing and the consequences. And it's like, yeah, you know what? You are kind of a loose cannon and with a certain kind of a track record. And yeah, you know what? We don't trust you around the good China. Thank you very much. And the
No pun
flatware and
intended.
bakeables and the whatever. So no, you're not coming over for dinner because we don't know what you're going to do. And especially too, once you recognize the backstory of that gate, like that's the last guy you want near that gate.
Yeah.
And then of course he ends up there eventually, but there's that whole idea of what, his father's sense of like sacrifice and what he's put up with. And then in the final moment, yeah, it is one of those moments of, true redemption. And again, where you realize that as much as he's been the villain, and again, it doesn't forgive his sins, but you're realizing that it's that combination of the addiction to power, learning a whole bunch of dysfunctional behaviors along the way, and then creating an environment where he had to perpetuate them to keep his family safe and turn them into fighting machines, because that was the way, in the dysfunctional world that he created around them, that was the way you had to cope. And that's, and again, sometimes that happens, it happens in regular families without the same, again,
Well,
metaphysical.
it is interesting. It's interesting to see the same dynamic at play as you were mentioning. Is a really good point that you're like, Dad, we didn't need to live in a secret compound and have an army. We just needed to have you around. It's a different kind of sacrifice, a different kind of focus. It reminded me of something that I've thought about. We go back to Spider-Man, the Homecoming, with the Vulture, and once again, there's another guy who's like, totally, I'm just doing this for my family. But it's like, well, okay, true, kind of, but where does his family live? Well, I mean, they live in a big, huge mansion, right? They live in and there's a difference between the kind of bravery to say, I'm going to pull it together and I'm going to maintain my family and my family's lifestyle no matter what, which then leads to, if it's without qualification, no matter what, like to whole like mobster kind of behavior, versus there's the other type of strength to go home and say, hey family, let's pull together. I just had this, I just lost this big contract and we're in trouble, and let's pull together and we'll still provide for each other and I'll provide for you, but it's going to be a little different. You know what I'm saying? He didn't do that.
Yeah, sure. Vulture did, the tech version of Breaking Bad, so to speak, where it was
Yes.
you know what, we're just, and that was what was interesting too, and again, in one of those monologues where it was this was about taking down, the man, taking down corporate entities and all these,
Yeah.
Dark and Shield, all this other kind of stuff. And so on one level, you could see where there was that justification coming from I'm just a little guy. And the system is, gamed against me. So therefore, the only way for me to win in this system is to literally double down and beat people at their own game and cheat. And it's like ooh, okay, well, I totally agree with you about how the system is set up, and especially, and at the same time, ooh, okay, is that that's not the healthy,
Right. It
always
always has to lean into
sideways, but nobody goes super villain.
Sure. And next thing you know, you're telling your daughter's like 16-year-old date to the homecoming dance that you might have to kill him. It's slippery slope there.
Well, this is it again. Plays on the whole like protective dad taking the kids to prom angle.
Right, exactly.
Like, there's more than one dad that has the whole, some crack about a shotgun on his T-shirt as the kid comes and picks up the date. But this was like next level.
More, by the way, I
Yeah,
figured
like
out your
this is
Spider-Man.
legit. Like you're not like this is not dad blowing hot air. You better be back by
Now I'm imagining, like, what if Walter White had gotten hold of alien tech? That would not have ended well. Although it didn't end well for anyone who knew Walter White in the
Yeah.
story, in that storyline. But no, it's the same type of thing, isn't it? To say, and in that storyline, actually, if you throw Breaking Bad into the mix, they actually have. There is a line where he admits in the end, he's like, I didn't really do this for anyone else. I did it for me to take over and take control and things. Some people have argued that that line was not said with any contrition, and in the scene where it was said to who it was said to, she didn't. She was like, "Oh, well, that's interesting to know," instead of saying like, "Yeah, motherfucker," you know.
Yeah.
But anyway, whatever.
Exactly.
That's a
But
whole
again,
Breaking
it's
Bad
that
thing.
whole thing that parents will do where they will make sacrifice, and that sometimes again that sacrifice and what they think they're doing for their family, at some point it can go off into left field, go take a turn that somewhere along the line they don't realize where they slip down this slippery slope there, or the point of no return where the hole just kept getting bigger and bigger, and that all you just keep doing is doubling down and amplifying. And that's the whole thing, like with when you think about Shang-Chi's father, I mean, again, there's 1,000 years of doing stuff a certain way. Like I said, he had like, again, a nearly godlike, quality or perception of himself, because everybody else comes and goes and they are just little pieces on my chessboard. And I think that was also the other part too, was what I love what he did, was also they let him, or not let him, they made sure that in the script there was that addressing of like, I've been around so long, I've become mythological and legendary, and to the point that somebody else comes along, doesn't even realize that I actually exist, but they were able to piggyback, create this whole other organization where they hire this really bad Liverpudlian actor to be me, and that people bought it because I was so mythological. And so at the same time that's all unfolding, yeah, we were sitting here back home doing whatever, and rather than on one level, yes, I was ticked about my reputation, but it wasn't like I troubled myself to go out there and just erase them all, because that was in my power had I chosen to do it. But your mom would have been really pissed.
It's
That was a dinner conversation I did not want to have.
right, exactly. And when we're talking about that, one of the things that's a big theme in this story is abandonment, obviously,
Mhm.
and with Shang-Chi's example or experience, that's the word. For some reason, I forgot the word experience. His experience was that he was able to take a little bit of control and power by running,
Mhm.
and the way that he did. Whereas I think, in a way, although she did run away as well, his sister had a more direct abandonment. Not so much, although there is the abandonment of dad's love, but there was also abandonment of her brother running away. So then when she ran away, it was after having felt betrayed and abandoned by him, right?
Yeah, you
Um,
never came back. Yeah.
yes,
Well,
yeah,
and that was the other part, was that in a sense she was, I mean, again, there was not really strong parenting skills there, again, especially at a certain point. So he was, in a sense, an absent or emotionally absent father to both of them. But he, as the son, was at least getting the training. So she trained herself
right.
because, dad didn't see me as worthy. And then, so she's always felt like she's lived in his shadow. And then he gets sent off, and she's still neglected and hoping that he will. So yeah, so he got to break away. And that was the other part too, is that it was this really interesting thing where he just did the full pendulum swing. You think about it, where you're raised with all these expectations. Yeah, I'm going to go to San Francisco and I'm going to like park cars and I'm going to live in this, I like, he was just like, I'm going to have the most slacker style lifestyle that
Right,
I
right.
can, and do as little as humanly possible. I've got this really cool friend whose family like feeds me, and and, and and we're just, yeah, like, so you had that thing where it's just, he wanted like the absolute opposite. And so the notion of anything like, financial stability or any of like all of that stuff for him was really tied to that old baggage. Like, why would I want to go do all of these things? And as much as he had settled, there was still that sense of, well, I need to be able to pick up and go
Mm-hmm.
when and if dad ever finds me. So why would I want to put down roots? Why would I want to do a thing that could put me on anybody's radar? So I am like literally taking the job where, for the most part, people don't even see me. I have a name tag on. How many people actually,
Right.
call me by my name in this job? They throw me their keys and they head into the Fairmont, and they go about their life, and all they want is for me or whoever else is there, because again, my colleagues and I are all interchangeable in this, part of the
Right.
service industry. So therefore they just want their car to show up again, and
And
maybe not have KD have run it through the
run
better
it
part of
through a
San
wall.
Francisco with her foot, on pedal to the metal. Just
and
saying.
and shorthand for struggle in any movie is living in a literal garage, someone else's
Yeah,
garage, apparently, where one of your whole walls is something that could come open at any moment.
yeah,
No, that's absolutely correct, and it's very interesting. I hadn't thought about this till you were saying that, but and then you have the role of his sister, who is actually probably, if we want to, I know that this is not a good, healthy legacy, but let's put that to the side for a minute
yeah,
and say she's actually probably psychologically and emotionally much better suited to step in and say, yeah, I want to learn how to run what dad does for a living. I want to be interned in the 10 rings and then take over.
yeah,
She totally actually has the skill set, and not the fight. They both fight, kung fu stuff really good, and all the stuff that they do there. But she's actually kind of the person who's like, Dad, I want to learn, and he's like, yeah, I didn't even hear you. I'm ignoring you.
Well, and that was the part that was interesting too. The idea that there's the one child that the expectation is placed on them, and they really don't want the weight, whereas the other child is seeking the attention and seeking, and so they're listening more, and they're paying more attention, they're studying, they're taking notes in hopes of getting some kind of recognition. And then so she's just like, well, I learned all this stuff, and if dad's not paying attention to me anyways, and heaven only knows where my brother is, like, screw him, I'm just going to go start my own little evil empire, so to speak. And screw the lot of you.
It's interesting
I'll show you I'm worthy, and I'm just
because
going to do my own thing.
when yeah, exactly, that she sets up her own sort of like superhero fight club that's going on. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was just, it's the I'll show you. And again, one of those, on one level you got it and you have the skill set, but it wasn't like you set up, some big philanthropic organization and you're doing whatever. It's like, oh, so this is like uber level, like cage fights. Like,
If we do exactly, and fairly
another
fairly next level when you see, because they had Wong and Abomination, and
way.
I've seen around on the internet people saying like theories about, is Wong's the character from Doctor Strange plays a role in this, and I love the idea that he's going to play a bigger role because he's a great actor, great character. But I've seen people saying like, oh, so when are we going to find out why was Wong hanging out with Abomination, blah, blah, blah. And I'll tell you, I may be in the minority. I kind of hope that we don't find out anything and that it's just, that's Wong, he's just in his spare time. Yeah, he's going to singing karaoke with buddies and beating up Abomination at some illegal fight club. Just, that's his weekend.
Yeah, exactly.
I
You
just like
spend all
that.
time in the minding the library and doing all these other things that, this is, you got to shake it off every.
Go beat up a super monster.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too, is that I enjoy exactly that. I'm like you. It's like, it'll be cool if at some point it's revealed, but I'm not really sweating those details. And that frankly, what I expected, that if they ever do reveal it, it's going to be some weird little throwaway sentence, in some other kind of thing. Heaven knows how many other movies or things away. And again, it's going to be like, and the part that's going to be funny is that the person that's going to blurt it out is going to they're going to be in a conversation with someone else that has no clue. And that person's going to do the what? And it's more of like the breaking the fourth wall with the audience thing, where it's going to be, Wong, blah, blah, blah. And you're like,
It'll be, Yeah, no, that's exactly what I would hope for. Is just somebody to be like, "You guys know each other? Yeah, don't worry about it." You know,
Yeah,
something
yeah,
like that.
exactly. Yeah, it was sort of like the same way that he showed up at the bar, right? So there they are telling the story, and it's like, okay, I get it. You're pulling my leg. Yeah, you
My
did this. And
favorite.
all of a sudden, he just, open up the portal. Yeah, and he's calling out for them, and they're both like,
Right.
we're here.
And and by the way, I noticed took the time to snag someone else's drink on the way out. By the way,
Yeah,
he comes in, he's like, "Oh, hey, well, you didn't need to do that. I know, I just wanted to." Yeah, super.
yeah. So no, but I think, but that was also, those were brilliant things too. There, the way they wove those things in and out, and I think that's the part. Again, when I think about the MCU and how it's been constructed, there is that interweaving of stuff, and it's not just about, like I said, the okay, we got to do this retcon thing on Trevor, which again, funny as heck, but it's this kind of stuff that again, how many minutes of that fight was on screen, or when you see
Right.
these other things where it's a shot of someone and you're like, hey, wait, isn't that so and so? Like that they can just pop in characters because they know that they've got this like huge universe and this
Think
huge,
about.
you can't give everybody their own movie. So sometimes it's a little nod, or it's an interlacing. And you know what? In some cases, those are cute little gems. And then it plants a seed where it's like okay, maybe we can tap into this in the future. Maybe we can't. But the point is, we at least got to put so and so
Yeah.
on the screen, or put these two characters together.
Absolutely. And it's such a wild thing, I think, growing up being a fan of these properties. And also at the same time, there was a certain level of maturity, I guess. I'm not sure what it was. When I remember being old enough to understand that I would never see these characters on screen together. Like there was a realization, right? When you were old enough to understand what was hey, wow, what if Spider-Man was there too? Oh, well, you won't see Spider-Man in a movie about this other character. Oh, why not? Well, it's just not the way it works when they make movies.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, click, that's in my head now, and I just know I never will. But then to say, oh, but now you could see a movie, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, Captain Marvel's part of this story. She is. I didn't know that. You know, um, and so that's such a new, exciting world, because that once again is a lot more like the comic book experience of saying, hey, there's this shared universe, and because within the
Mhm.
comic book universe, it's not even impossible. I mean, they've had comics where Batman fought Dracula, for crying out loud. I mean, they do all kinds of experiments. They had Superman and Muhammad Ali box once.
Yeah, yeah. Like you can do all of these things, and so yeah, it was very weird. And on one level, I get it. Like especially in the the earlier days of doing these things, it was the how do you do it? And that, yeah, you have, here's your superhero, here's their nemesis for this movie, and then you
Yeah.
leave it at that. And then we have seen cases where, and whether it was, as the original Tim Burton Batman series went off on this thing, and then they just again shoving everybody in that they could. And then we saw the same thing happen in the Tobey Maguire, the Spider-Man, where again it was okay, we got a couple good movies, and
Right.
now they're just trying to pack everything in, and there's no continuity. And so I think a lot of people kind of fell into that thing where it's like, well, I guess we can't really do this. And it's like, oh, all you need is the right story, like the right storytelling and the
Yeah.
right integration. And that if you're just trying to make a super simple story arc, then you're not going to have the nuance and the whatever. And that having constructed this universe, I mean, these things all stand alone on like, you don't necessarily have to know who Wong is. You don't have
Right.
to like be like you and I probably invest way more time and brain cells than a lot of other folks do in this. But you know what? Everybody's got their thing. But the thing is that you could still see that as funny and still
No.
appreciate like, who's this guy? Didn't we just see him in the fight? Now he's calling, oh, he's tied to this other
Right.
stuff.
He's
So
some
it's
magic
still,
guy, huh? Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
so it's still interesting. So if
Yeah.
you literally walked into that as your very first MCU movie, you would still get the movie.
Right.
You might not get some of the weird little layers that were in there. You would still get enough about Trevor to know that there was this thing, but you don't have to have like watched the one shot and watch the original and all this stuff. So I think that's the part that makes the difference is the
Yeah.
story writing, and that's what I love about it, because that story writing was always there
And
in the
to have,
comics, and that's why you get those crossovers and
yeah.
alternate verses and things like that. They could still hold it together and go, and again, that's what I'm loving now about the what ifs. It's the same thing. It's like if you're doing it right and you're writing it well, then anything's possible.
And to use it as a platform to kind of play around with human emotions, human morality, and those kinds of tales. And that's where I do like to see, because when you have an ending like that, where there's like a dragon fighting and a monster, and and you're doing all that kind of stuff, that we've seen so many examples of films and movies that do that, and that's all it is. It's like, oh, it's a dragon fighting a monster, and that's worth what it's worth. But it's kind of, to be honest, kind of dull. We've gotten to a point where we can kind of watch. You can watch. Trust me, I have in the last few years, putting Godzilla on blast. You can watch big monsters fight each other and be like, I'm kind of bored, because there either isn't any real kind of relevancy emotionally, or that's not done well. And I think in this case, once again, I guess I hit it before a little bit, but the idea that ultimately, the power, even though you could say that the power is the 10 rings, or the power is super kicking and punching and magic kung fu and stuff, and those are all powers, but the biggest power that actually separates the characters from their father, the two main characters, and also Aquafina's character, from the dad character, is vulnerability. All of them
Mm-hmm.
at some point, they are willing to be vulnerable, to ask for help, or to depend on each other. And even and then ultimately you got the idea that Shang-Chi wasn't going to actually kill his dad when it came to it. He was going to say, Dad, don't, come on, don't, I'll try to stop you, but just don't do it, come on,
Well,
I need
and
you.
even and even his aunt letting them in, and making, in a sense, she was being vulnerable, like letting people come in, knowing who they were. It's like, okay, I'm taking a risk, but you're gonna, and that was a big risk on her part. And I mean, she went again, she had to justify herself, and there was the whole, yeah, that ain't happening thing, from the rest of the community. And so exactly, that was the willing to be vulnerable. And that's, I think, the part that was interesting about his father's character, is that he feels that he was vulnerable, and it cost him his wife's
Right.
life, and that whole little bubble that he built. And it's not to say that he wasn't vulnerable in that period, but there was, yeah, there
But
was
he
always
wasn't.
something there that
Ultimately, yes. Ultimately, really, his weakness was that he wasn't vulnerable. He didn't see it through. Because
yes, there's like
to
a performative
really,
vulnerability.
yes, to have made that change, there's a whole different reaction to coming home and finding that scene, if he was really committed to that. Okay, love, vulnerability, I'm here for my kids. You know what? Let's pack up and go somewhere else. And I mean, maybe I'll still keep the rings in the trunk of the car just in case. But still, we're going to be vulnerable to actual being there for my children the way they need me to. That's the
Mm-hmm.
consistent vulnerability. Instead of saying like, nope, tried that, knew it wasn't going to work, always had that, that was in the back of my mind. I knew
Yeah,
it
yeah.
wasn't going to. Let me put this stuff back on and go start kicking some ass.
Yeah.
Which,
Yeah,
yeah,
I agree. That was the biggest difference. And well, and it was a really interesting thing too, to see again that idea of, again, the kind of parenting that was going on there. The idea of, again, in terms of both of the kids running away to break the cycle, it him running away, swinging in the opposite direction, to be like as irresponsible and transient as possible, whereas his daughter was, the
right.
I'm gonna show
I'm
you
gonna.
and build it. So they were both, pendulum swinging in different directions, but they still live, no matter how either physically or far away they were from their father. He was
Yeah.
still this presence. And I think that's the other thing that a lot of folks, especially from a mental health perspective, you're that separation. I mean, yes, we talk about individuation and these different things that that happen, and you do to a certain degree, but it's amazing how much, especially if you've had a really shitty upbringing, whatever it's been, pardon my French there, but it's the how much that person looms large on the horizon. So that was the part that was interesting. As much as they both, on one level, threw him off and were going in a different direction, he still had a lot of power in their life, because it was that presence of him behind their shoulder that then determined what they were going to do. I'm either going to do the exact opposite of what dad wants me to do, or I'm going to do
Oh,
what should have
interesting.
been acknowledged by dad. And so it's really dad is still making their decisions. They never really thought about it that way, but that's a total trauma response right there. Like, that's
Mm-hmm.
the whole, like, and so and I think that was the part that I found interesting, was them then getting into that fight. And I'd like to think that he did it a little bit better than his sister did. Not that she didn't try, but I mean, you see that closing scene there, and you're like, okay, now honey just got what she wanted here, and she might not have the rings, but
It's
again, not seeing
but
her
she's
running
got
competition
right.
with the Gates Foundation anytime soon in terms of
Right,
where
exactly. She's not.
her
It didn't
organization.
get the idea. I didn't get the idea. It was just a martial arts school for women. It was a little bit. It seemed like there
Yeah,
was some purpose behind that training. It was
yeah,
once
yeah.
again progressive, but
Yeah, like the paint job. You
yeah,
got a
yeah.
totally different feel. There's some rebranding going on here, but I'm thinking it's a lot more superficial rebranding. And great, we've changed the logo, but all the products are still the
And
same.
if you notice, with Marvel's famous "so and so will be back," that they
Mhm.
always will. They actually said the 10 rings will be back, and we have both the physical representation of the actual magical ring things and the organization, the Ten
Well,
Rings, that she's now in
exactly,
charge of. Yeah.
exactly. They are now two totally separate entities, and she in a sense doesn't need the rings in the sense that her father built and she's taking over, coupled with the skill set she's got. Like,
Yeah.
that's quite the legacy there. She's got the muscle, the this, the that, whatever. This is not a little startup. She's not like in dad's garage kind of thing. And then he's got the rings and trying to figure. And there's that whole legacy. And then again, we had the little nod with the whole. Well, how old are these? What are they doing? And what kind of signals on what level? Okay, hold on.
Well, and I'll say, one of the things that kind of fits with that is that you look at some of the lasting damage that is done through trauma, addiction, abandonment, some of those different things. We could read into this a little and say, here's a person who, for all the things that this journey has taught everyone, at the end, she's like, great, I can be a really my own criminal boss now. There's at least, and sometimes there's still little, I want to say like flexibility, holes in our judgment. There's different things that do hang on sometimes. And even if we're in recovery or even if we're in whatever we're in, there's always this, we always need to be more cautious because there's all different forms of relapse that we can fall into if we've been through
Well,
stuff.
and that sometimes you think, like I said, that's that whole thing where you think you're going in a different direction, and all you're really doing is, again, just a rebrand of the same thing.
Yeah.
So you think you're doing something different because to you it looks and feels different. And then it's like, again, from the outside or in retrospect, and you're like, oh man, that really wasn't as different as I thought it was. And I just, again, slapped a coat of paint on the outside, but I've literally, I'm perpetuating it. And I think that was, again, one of the things that, she gets the organization and in some respects, I guess you'd say represents a more direct perpetuation of her father's, behaviors.
Sure.
Even though she did try to do her own thing. And then you're going to see, we're going to see what happened with him. And that I think, and maybe in some respects, he broke the cycle a little bit better. And you see certain things, but he's still in that really early stage. And that it was like, you saw him up to, like you said, those final moments where it's the whole, okay, maybe I do have to kill dad. So he's,
Right.
I really don't want to, but if that's the only way this is going to so he's not 100% solid. And I think what's going to happen is we are going to see some things where there's going to be those hold
There's
on,
going to
fork in the
be,
road
there
moments.
could be, yeah. And we don't know. Are we going to see the 10 rings go sideways against the Avengers or the new event or whoever's going to be the
Yeah.
people? Or, are we going to see them eventually on some big in game battlefield, Wakanda style, here's a big group of soldiers that come from the 10 rings? Or more likely both. Are we going to see both?
Yeah. Well, and what I'm really curious to see is how Katie plays into this. Like, I loved Aquafina's character, and I mean, and how
Yeah.
they played off each other. I mean, it was. I think that's the other part that I loved was this was a variety of movies. So you had your redemption arc, you had your family dynamic and family history arc. You had this wonderful integration of traditional Chinese mythology and characters and all these other kinds of things brought in.
Yeah.
And then you also have, it's like, oh, look, it's a buddy film.
And
and
one
the
of the
road trip films. And it's like, again, her in cars,
and throwing her in, it was actually really great because oftentimes it's nice in these movies to have somebody who is the the sort of like normal person stand-in, someone to be like, what the,
Mhm.
throughout the whole thing, like we would be, any of us normal people that were sitting there.
Yeah, yeah, like,
Um, but
yeah,
hers
yeah,
was
like,
probably one of my favorites of that role because she's also a real badass kind of person in a way that kind of felt realistic to where she's like a cool person. She's a strong person at the same time, not above being like, okay, that's a dragon. What's going on? Oh my
on here,
gosh,
yeah, yeah,
this
like
is
that, and
real. Yeah,
exactly, and then and her own rebellion stuff with her family is like, yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm not taking on the serious job either, and like I love doing this because yeah, so and so just came by with like this hot car, and yeah, I'll park it after I drive it around half the city first,
yeah.
possibly in violation of the local, Highway Traffic Act or something like that, and then I'll park it really nicely and we'll act like none of this happened. And so that again, she had her own rebellion and family issues, and that I think that was the part. Like again, you're talking about that being that normal person thing.
Right.
There, as he walks into his family, and you're like, oh, geez. And I was worried about my grandma and my brother and mom being up in my business. Holy, you know.
And that reaction that they have is once again brilliant from a comedic standpoint. The people in the bar just like, you what, and I really like one of the things that they bring into the Marvel projects that just speaking as a person who studies human behavior at all, I think it's great that they have these little moments where it's like, yeah, you would have that would happen if you lived in a world where all this crazy weird stuff was happening. You would have times where someone would be out to dinner saying, yeah, and then like this dragon, and then I'm hanging under the dragon, and I'm down there with my bow and arrow, and I'm like, I got a bow and arrow over here, and it's like, what are you talking about? And
But
it's like, yeah, it actually brings up one of my times that I really chuckled about was at the Falcon and the Winter Soldier show when there's a bit where I can't remember the guy's name, CIA agent's talking to Sam, and he says, well, there's rumors, that Captain America could be on the moon. And he looks at him exactly the same way you'd look at like a flat earther and rolls his eyes like, oh, conspiracy theories.
yeah,
I kind of wanted that character to like push back a little and say, why is that more crazy than anything that's happened in our world in the last 5 years?
yeah, exactly.
Well, hold on. Don't be so judgy of me being curious about a moon base when you are fighting like these creatures that throw planets at each other.
Exactly.
But anyway,
Well,
so
this is it. So no, she was brilliant. So I'm curious to see what they do with that. But it was really, yeah, I was excited for it. I was really excited to see Simu Liu in it because for all the other different things he's done for us
yeah.
Canadians, I mean, he's Chung from from Kim's Convenience, and again, kind of that
Oh,
like
of course, yeah,
so,
yeah.
so that's this comedy that takes place, and I mean, and the part that's funny is that the neighborhood that it's filmed in, like they actually changed the sign on the actual store, and so it's like it's got this. And again, I don't know what it's like in other cities where people film and, but there's certain places in Toronto that you just get used to seeing. And so they
Mhm.
become like these neighborhood places. And then again, the actors that were involved, like it was this, so it's this show that's been around for a while. And unfortunately it got, canceled. And that was a whole other issue. And that actually had to do with representation because
Oh, wow.
it originally started off as a show written by a Korean Canadian. It was actually done as a stage play at one point too, and then it
I didn't
spun
know
off
that.
into
Huh.
yeah. And so what happened was there was good Korean and Asian representation, and then what happened was that it shifted, and we found out that when the show ultimately was canceled, there had been other problems, and that it had been this idea that despite the fact that you had this cast that all could have, again, all could contribute and did all these other different things, that basically once the key writer left, it was all going to implode and they were just shutting it down because there wasn't enough, again, lived experience being brought to the table. So it was really heartbreaking because it is a wonderful show. And I mean, like one of the things that I loved was that the gentleman who plays Appa, his dad, is also a huge Star Wars nerd. So if you follow his Instagram, he's on there. So he was in The Mandalorian in a couple episodes. So that was like
Oh,
another, like, oh my God, okay. So like, we got to keep like Appa's, on The Mandalorian. And then, and then Simu becoming Shang-Chi was just like the, oh my God, like, so
yeah.
every Canadian, it was like, that's our guy, that's our guy. And so to see him do that, I mean, honestly, I'm clearly fangirling here, but it's like he was born for the role. He did it so well. You could see in some respects, the stuff that played out in Kim's Convenience, clearly not at the same level, but it was that same thing where he was dealing with, his folks were the first generation immigrants. They, like many other Korean families, give up the professions that they had to run a convenience store to look after their kids. And then the kids, on one level benefit, but at the same time, it's a sort of, well, we want you to take it over thing. He's the older, so we've got another older brother, younger sister dynamic. So it was interesting to see that he, and again, it's obviously not, like at a different level, but you can see where there's certain things where it's like, okay, he's done this ish, but the kinds of fights that he had with Appa were not, did not involve dragons.
You don't know. I mean, they canceled it. You don't know what next season would have brought.
Yeah, and his little sister, in that show is mouthy, but she's, not starting, she's a fine art student. She's a photography student. She's not going to take over the world.
Right. Everything's ramped up a little bit. Yeah,
exactly. But it was so nice to see this cast of characters. And I have to say the other part that I loved, and again, maybe this comes from somebody that already watches a lot of shows with subtitles. My kids are actually surprised when it's like, they walk into the living room. Mom's got something on in English. What's going on here? Because they're just used to me watching Korean programs. It's like my world is like either Korean or Marvel, at this point. So I just sat there in the movie theater and was just like, I love this because it's again that whole thing about the characters are speaking their language in the appropriate context. And yes, there's English in certain places where it makes sense, but it was that thing where, I was actually, I hate to say it, but I was worried that there was going to be this backlash from a whole bunch of, again, the same folks that make the other kinds of critiques that we were making before, where it's oh my God, I don't go to a movie to read. Our only concern was the fact that my youngest is dyslexic. And so we all sat there, wow, dude, did we just, feeling like a bad mom here? And he's like, no, it was all fine. It moved at a good pace. So, but that was our biggest concern, was much more from an accessibility perspective, but it was just so cool because it made sense, because that's always one of the things that I found so weird is you watch something and, I again think back to the old World War II movies where the difference between the Germans and the English was what kind of British accent they had.
Right.
I don't want you to do a crappy German accent, but could again, it's you guys all sound like you came out of RADA, and
don't hire a German. Let's not be crazy, but no.
No,
exactly. But seeing that appreciation of that representation of saying like, oh, here's somebody who not only are they convincing in a role, but they actually, maybe that's even their language, or they even have that comfort. It brings I think that brings such a depth to a lot of different things that we're able to see nowadays. And I that's why I really celebrate it too.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. And I loved, Black Widow touched on it a little bit, but again, the context of how that story played out with the time that they spent as a family, and there's a whole other, there's a whole other family movie there. But so they at least had the opportunity to speak English in certain contexts where it did make sense, despite the fact that it wasn't their original language, and that in some cases it was probably safer for them, despite where they were, to speak English in terms of, anyone listening in on them. So it was nice to see that they kind of put their toe in the water there, but to have this one go deep on it was just like, okay, cool. But I didn't know how other fans felt about that, because I was just like, oh, subtitles, cool. My only concern is the quality of the translation, but I'm presuming that Marvel sorted that out.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna come back and do a couple of other things about some other things, but tell people now a little bit, as always, where they can find you and what kinds of things you're working on these days.
Well, okay, so I am, oh gosh, and I feel so bad saying this, still working on flipping over my stuff to a, basically I do at Speak Up, and that's www.speak-up.co. I have a superhero and basically Marvel inspired mental health program where the mental health and neurodiversity. So it's all reframing. And so I'm now flipping over to being able to run it online rather than in person. So I still do my keynotes and my webinars and those kinds of things, but it's flipping it over. But I have to say, I swear, anything that involves a website, let's just say I feel like Doctor Strange and Dormammu, that loop. And
Yeah,
I feel like
I'm also laughing because of the way I am with updating my own website, and like even websites on other platforms like my profile on Psychology Today or other things like that. I'm like, I need to update that. Oh, yeah. 6 months later, I'm like, did I ever update that? I don't think I did. Yeah.
This is the whole, oh God, WordPress. But so, which again is not hard, but it's again won't go. But so that's what I'm doing. So it's the speakup.co. I'm just refreshing the old one while I wait for the new one. We've got some other things coming up where there's going to be again, this goes to the Korean part. Once I get this up and running, and again, maybe just curl up in a little Marvel bubble for a while, to recuperate, and read my original editions of Eternals before that comes out. Then it'll be taking the K-pop and the BTS inspired stuff, and the fact that they've done some things. So there's other things like the links to the article that I published in Korea earlier this year is on the website too. So yeah, it's so that's what I do. I do mental health through pop culture filters, because by getting folks to engage with things, you can take really complex, like what we've been doing in all these podcasts. You can talk about things in a way that makes them more relatable and gives people, frankly, inspiration, and ways of going, okay, if so-and-so can get through that, well, so can I. Or the Embrace Your Superpowers and the Bulletproof to Stigma programs are still most of what I do. And yeah, fangirl here with all of my merch behind me from both worlds.
Very good.
And because, again, to me, my fandom was healing. I've told you this, Stan Lee was probably my first therapist. And then, discovering the music of BTS, like I said, that there's an almost 9-year catalog of music that draws on everything from Jungian things to James Doty. So I'm all about how we can use our passions for healing and recovery.
Well, and you look at how people have reacted to even just some of the concepts as well as characters and things like that. And particularly with the young generation, who now you've got people like our kids' age, right, who are those that are teens and even young adults now, who practically their entire life post being able to form memories has included these movies and these stories, which then has given great accessibility to different formats and things as well. So people are responding to it because it exists for a reason. There's a reason why.
In some respects, it's our mythology. Like in other eras, you had like these are our stories, and like all other mythologies, whether you're talking about Greek gods, Norse gods, whatever, there is always on one level that fantastical element, but at the same time, they're really just telling stories about family and recovery and other social dynamics and other things. It's that we all live through. They're just doing it in a bigger way. And so this is exactly it. We're surrounded by that now. And like I said, if they can be used to help people in other ways, like I'm all for it. And that's what I love about this podcast, is that it gives us the opportunity to talk about a lot of really heavy stuff, but it's not a downer. It's hey, you can have these really wacky conversations, but you can do it in an empowering and a healing way. And that, again, you can watch a movie that, doesn't, it's not like a heavy-handed moral lesson, but it's also not fluff. And you can immerse yourself in it in whichever way you want at the time.
Thank you for listening to the Courtemp Arts Podcast Network. To listen to more Courtemp Arts shows, visit courtemparts.com.